The roar of my bike echoed through the desolate highway as the wind whipped against my face. I was heading home from a long, grueling shift at the garage when I spotted a sleek black car pulled over on the side of the road. Its hazard lights blinked in distress, and beside it stood a woman in a designer dress, pacing anxiously. I wasn't the type to leave someone stranded. With a firm pull on the brakes, I brought my bike to a stop and removed my helmet. "Need help?" I called out, walking toward her. She turned, and for a moment, I was taken aback. Her face, though strikingly beautiful, was twisted in frustration. "Do you know anything about cars?" she asked, crossing her arms. Her voice carried an air of authority, but there was also a hint of desperation. I glanced at the vehicle, an expensive model that screamed money. "I know enough," I replied, rolling up my sleeves. "Let me take a look." She hesitated before nodding. "Fine, but if you mess it up more, I'll—" She stopped herself, exhaling sharply. "Just please fix it." Beneath the hood, it didn't take long to diagnose the issue. A loose belt. I reached into my toolkit, quickly tightening it back into place. "There. Should be good now," I said, stepping back and wiping my hands on my jeans. She slid into the driver's seat and turned the ignition. The car roared to life. Her shoulders slumped with relief as she glanced at me. "Wow, you actually fixed it." I smirked. "Didn't think I could." She bit her lip before shaking her head. "Thanks. No problem. Just be careful. These roads get dangerous at night." She studied me for a moment, as if trying to figure me out. "What's your name?" "Jackson," I said, extending a hand. She hesitated before shaking it. "I'm Alina." "Nice to meet you, Alina." She nodded, and for a second, it seemed like she wanted to say something else. But instead, she reached for her purse and pulled out a stack of bills. "Here, for your trouble." I frowned, stepping back. I didn't do it for money. She looked at me, confused. "Then why?" I shrugged. "Because it was the right thing to do." For the first time, her expression softened. "You're different." I chuckled. "I get that a lot." As I turned to leave, she called after me. "Jackson." I glanced back. "Be careful on the roads, too," she said. I gave her a nod before revving up my bike and speeding off into the night, unaware that this brief encounter was about to change my life forever. As I rode away, the night air biting at my skin, something about that encounter lingered in my mind. Alina. There was something in her eyes, something unspoken, but I had my own battles to fight. I shook the thought away and focused on the road ahead. Then, barely a few miles down, I saw flashing blue lights in my mirror. A police car. "Just great," I muttered, slowing down as the sirens blared. I pulled over to the side, watching as an officer stepped out, his heavy boots crunching against the gravel. He approached with a flashlight, scanning my bike before eyeing me. "License and registration," he said, his tone flat. I complied, handing over the worn-out documents. He studied them before looking back at me. "Been a long night, hasn't it?" he asked. "You could say that. Know anything about a woman stranded back a few miles? Expensive car, might have needed help." I tensed slightly. "Yeah, I helped her out." "What?" The officer smirked. "That woman you helped. She's not just anyone. She's Alina Sinclair, daughter of Marcus Sinclair." I raised a brow, the name hitting me like a freight train. Everyone knew Marcus Sinclair, billionaire tycoon, real estate mogul, and one of the most influential men in the country. My jaw clenched. "Did she report something?" "No," the officer said, closing his notepad. "In fact, she called us herself, to make sure you weren't being harassed on the road." That caught me off guard. "She said you helped her and refused her money. Thought we should make sure you got home safe." I blinked, the realization settling in. Alina had done that. "Why?" The officer sighed, handing me back my documents. "Ride safe, son." As he walked back to his cruiser, my mind spun. I had no idea who I had just met, but something told me this was far from the last time I'd see Alina Sinclair. As the officer drove away, I sat on my bike for a moment, staring at the empty road ahead. The daughter of Marcus Sinclair. It all made sense now. Her high-end car, her attitude, the way she carried herself. I should have guessed. People like her didn't belong in the same world as people like me. Shaking off the unease, I gripped the handlebars and throttled forward. My cheap one-bedroom apartment was waiting, and so was another long day at the garage. But fate wasn't done with me yet. The next morning, I was halfway through changing the oil on a beat-up truck when my boss, Mike, stomped into the garage, wiping his greasy hands on his overalls. "Jackson, someone's out front of skin for you." I frowned, wiping the sweat off my forehead. "Who?" Mike smirked. "Some fancy-dressed woman. Looks out of place round here." My stomach twisted. No way. Tossing the rag aside, I walked toward the entrance, and there she was. Alina, standing in the middle of the garage, surrounded by rusted cars and stained floors, looking like she had walked straight out of a luxury magazine. "What are you doing here?" I asked, wiping my hands on my jeans. She looked at me, then at the garage, her lips pressing together as if she was second-guessing her decision. "I owe you a proper thank you." I crossed my arms. "I already told you. I didn't do it for money." She let out a small huff, stepping closer. "I know. That's why I'm here." I tilted my head. "You tracked me down just to say thanks." She hesitated. "Not exactly." Before I could press her for more, the sound of screeching tires filled the air. A black SUV pulled up outside, and two men in suits stepped out, their eyes scanning the area like hawks. Alina's expression hardened. I wasn't an idiot. I knew what bodyguards looked like. "I need a favor," she said, her voice lower now. "And you might be the only person I can trust." I stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. Just last night, I was a nobody fixing a stranger's car on a lonely highway. Now, the billionaire's daughter was standing in front of me, looking desperate. This was going to be trouble. I could feel in my bones. "You need a favor?" "From me?" I repeated, eyeing the suited men standing near the SUV. Alina nodded, shifting uncomfortably under my stare. "Yes, but I need to know, can I trust you?" I let out a short, humorless laugh. "Trust? Lady, I don't even know what this is about." She exhaled, looking over her shoulder at the men. Then she turned back to me, stepping closer, lowering her voice. "I need to disappear for a while." I stiffened. "Disappear? Why?" She hesitated before answering. "Because my father wants to control my life, and I refuse to be a pawn in his business deals." I let her words settle, studying her. She had money. She had power. And yet, she looked trapped. "I need a place to lay low. Just for a few days," she continued, her eyes pleading. "I can pay you." I shook my head. "Not interested in your money." Her jaw clenched, but instead of looking frustrated like before, she just looked tired. "Then do it because I helped you last night," she said softly. I ran a hand through my hair. Every instinct told me this was a bad idea, but something about her, about the desperation in her voice, made me pause. Sighing, I gestured toward the garage. "I don't have a fancy mansion, but there's a spare room in the back." Her lips parted slightly, as if she hadn't expected me to agree. "You mean it?" I nodded. "Yeah, but you better tell me what the hell I'm getting myself into." She glanced at the bodyguards again. "Let's just say my father doesn't like losing." A chill ran down my spine. I had no idea what I was stepping into, but one thing was certain. This was only the beginning. As soon as I let Alina into the back room of the garage, she pulled out her phone and typed something before shutting it off completely. "They'll be tracking me," she muttered. I raised a brow. "Your own family?" She nodded, tucking the phone into her bag. "My father controls everything. His people will be looking for me." "Great," I muttered, rubbing my temples. "And now they're going to be looking for me, too." She met my eyes, something flickering in her gaze. "I won't let you get dragged into this, Jackson. If it gets too dangerous, I'll leave." I let out a dry laugh. "Yeah? And go where?" She pressed her lips together, but no answer came. That's what I thought. Before I could say anything else, loud knocking echoed from the garage doors. We both froze. Then a deep voice called out, "Jackson Carter, we know you're in there." My stomach dropped. They had found us. Alina's grip on my arm tightened as the knocking grew more insistent. My mind raced. They had found us too fast. Either they had been tracking her car last night, or they had eyes everywhere. "Stay here," I whispered, stepping toward the garage doors. "Jackson," she started, but I shook my head. I grabbed a wrench from the workbench as I approached the entrance, just in case things went south. Taking a steadying breath, I cracked the door open slightly. Two men in suits stood outside, their faces expressionless, their eyes scanning the dimly lit garage. "Can I help you?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe like I had all the time in the world. One of them, taller and built like a linebacker, tilted his head. "We're looking for someone." "Yeah? Well, This ain't a hotel, I shot back. His eyes narrowed. We have reason to believe Alina Sinclair was seen in this area. I raised a brow. Sinclair? As in the Billionaire. The other man, shorter but just as menacing, stepped forward. You seen her? I made a show of rubbing my jaw, pretending to think. Can't say I have. What's she to you? None of your business, the taller one said. I snorted. Right. And you think she'd just be hanging out in a rundown garage like this? The shorter man's gaze flickered past me, scanning the dimly lit space behind me. I tensed, shifting slightly to block his view. Mind if we take a look around? I let out a slow breath, playing it cool. Actually, I do mind. This is private property. The taller man's lips pressed into a thin line. Listen, kid, this isn't something you want to get involved in. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice. And I don't take kindly to people showing up at my workplace, making demands. We stared each other down for a moment, the air thick with tension. Then, as if making some silent decision, the taller one let out a huff and stepped back. If you see her, you let us know, he said, pulling out a card and shoving it into my hand. I glanced at it briefly before tucking it into my pocket. Sure, I'll get right on that. They didn't look convinced, but they had no reason to force their way in. Not yet. After another tense pause, they turned and walked back to their black SUV, driving off into the night. I waited a beat before locking the door and turning back to Alina. She was standing in the doorway of the back room, her face pale. They'll be back, I muttered. She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. I know. I ran a hand through my hair. You better start talking. Now. Alina sat on the edge of my workbench, exhaling shakily. My father is forcing me into a marriage I don't want. I blinked. Excuse me. She looked up, her eyes filled with frustration. He's arranging a business merger, and I'm the bargaining chip. I scoffed. What is this, the Dark Ages? She let out a bitter laugh. Feels like it. My father controls everything. Who I meet, what I do, where I go. And now, he wants me to marry some rich heir to another empire. I rubbed my temples. So you ran. She nodded. And now they'll do whatever it takes to drag me back. I let her words sink in. This wasn't just a case of a rich girl trying to escape her privileged life. She was running from a life she had no control over. Look, I don't know much about your world, I admitted. But you need a plan. She exhaled sharply. I was hoping you could help me with that. I gave her a look. Alina, I fix engines, not broken billion-dollar family ties. I don't need you to fix anything, she said quickly. I just need time to figure out my next move. I sighed, glancing toward the locked garage doors. Well, time is something we don't have much of. Her shoulders slumped slightly. Then what do we do? I studied her for a moment before making a decision. First, we get you out of here. She frowned. Where? I grabbed my helmet and tossed her a spare. Somewhere they won't expect. She hesitated, then caught the helmet. And that would be... A smirk tugged at my lips. Ever been on a bike before? She swallowed hard. Not like this. I swung my leg over my motorcycle and patted the seat behind me. Then tonight's your lucky night. She stared at me, then at the door, then back at me. For a moment, she looked like she might argue. But instead, she took a deep breath, climbed on behind me, and wrapped her arms around my waist. As I revved the engine and sped off into the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. And whatever came next, I had no way of stopping it. The night air was cold as we sped down the dark highway, the distant hum of city lights disappearing behind us. Alina's grip around my waist tightened every time I leaned into a turn, her warmth pressed against my back. I could feel her fear, her uncertainty. We're heading out of town, she called over the wind. For now, I replied, keeping my eyes on the road. They'll search for you where they think you'd go. The last place they'll look is where they don't expect you. She hesitated before asking, and where is that? I smirked. A little place outside the city. Don't worry, it's safe. I didn't tell her that I hadn't been back there in years. The old cabin had belonged to my grandfather, a place I used to escape to when things got rough growing up. It was hidden in the woods, far from prying eyes. She didn't press further, and I could tell she was exhausted. By the time we finally pulled up to the isolated cabin, the only sounds were the rustling trees and the distant chirp of crickets. I killed the engine, and she slid off the bike, stretching. This is remote. That's the point, I said, unlocking the front door. The inside was dusty, but livable. An old couch, a fireplace, a small kitchen, and a single bed in the corner. It's not a five-star hotel, but it'll keep you hidden. She stepped inside, wrapping her arms around herself. I don't care about hotels. I just need space to think. I watched her for a moment. The way she looked around, lost in thought. Alina, I said, my voice softer now. Are you sure about this? If you stay on the run, it's going to get harder. She met my gaze, something steely behind her tired expression. I'd rather fight for my freedom than let my father control me. I respected that. All right, I said, stepping back. Get some rest. I'll keep watch. She hesitated. You don't have to. I do. I gave her a pointed look. They could track you here. We can't take chances. She didn't argue this time. Instead, she nodded and disappeared into the cabin while I leaned against my bike, scanning the dark horizon. Somewhere out there, her father's men were searching, and something told me they weren't far behind. A few hours passed, and the night grew still. The kind of silence that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I wasn't paranoid, but I trusted my gut. And right now, it was telling me something was off. Then I saw them. 2 figures, moving through the trees just beyond the cabin. Damn it. I slipped inside quickly, locking the door behind me. Alina was lying on the couch, half asleep, but she stirred when she saw my expression. What's wrong? We have company, I whispered. She sat up instantly, eyes wide. Here. I nodded, motioning for her to stay low. The shadows outside were closing in fast. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen counter, my only weapon at the moment, and positioned myself near the door. Then, a loud bang echoed as someone pounded on the door. Jackson Carter, a voice called. I didn't answer. We know you're in there. The voice continued. We just want to talk. Yeah, sure they did. Alina clenched her fists. It's them. I took a deep breath, then turned to her. You trust me? She swallowed hard, but nodded. Yes. Good. Because we're not letting them take you. I glanced toward the back window, the only other exit. If we were getting out of this, we needed a plan. And fast. The pounding on the door grew louder. Whoever they weren't planning on leaving. I glanced at Alina. Can you run? She nodded, though I could see the fear in her eyes. Then we need to move. I pointed to the back window. We slip out, take my bike, and get as far from here as possible. She hesitated. What if they see us? They will, I admitted. But we'll be faster. I led her toward the back, carefully lifting the window. The cold night air hit my skin as I peeked outside. Clear for now. I helped her through first, then followed, landing quietly on the ground. The second our feet hit the dirt, a voice shouted from the front. They're in the back. Run. I grabbed Alina's hand, pulling her toward the bike. Behind us, footsteps thundered. I reached the bike, practically shoving her onto the seat before swinging my leg over. The headlights of the SUV turned on, blinding us for a moment. I revved the engine. Then we were flying down the dirt path, dust kicking up behind us as gunshots rang through the night. My heart pounded. We weren't just running anymore. We were being hunted. The bike roared beneath us as I gunned it down the dirt road, kicking up dust and gravel. Alina clung to me tightly, her breathing ragged against my back. The SUV's headlights glared behind us, its engine growling as it tore after us. Hold on, I shouted over the wind. The gunshots had stopped, but I wasn't stupid. They weren't going to let us go that easily. My tires skidded as I took a sharp turn onto a narrow side road, barely dodging a fallen log. The SUV swerved but kept coming, its monstrous size eating up the distance. Alina's fingers dug into my jacket. Jackson, they're getting closer. I gritted my teeth. Not for long. Up ahead, the road forked, one leading to an open field, the other to the abandoned railroad tracks. I had seconds to decide. The field was suicide. Open space, no cover. The tracks, on the other hand. I jerked the bike toward the tracks. The moment we hit the uneven ground, the ride turned rough, but the SUV hesitated. It wasn't built for this terrain. Come on, I muttered, urging the bike forward. The SUV skidded to a halt at the edge of the tracks, its driver hesitating. Then, just as I hoped, they realized they have to go around to catch us. That bought us time. I breathed. Alina twisted to look behind us. But not much. I didn't argue. We had minutes before they circled back. I needed to get us somewhere safe, somewhere they wouldn't expect. And I knew just the place. We reached a run-down industrial district just outside of town, where rusted shipping containers and abandoned factories stood like forgotten ghosts. I pulled the bike behind an old warehouse, killing the engine. Alina jumped off, breathing hard. What now? I scanned the area. We stay low until morning. They won't expect us to stop so soon. She nodded, though I could see the fear lingering in her eyes. Jackson, why are you helping me? I exhaled, leaning against the bike. Because you needed help. And because I know what it's like to have someone try to control your life. She looked at me, something shifting in her expression. Thank you. I nodded. Get some rest. I'll keep watch. She hesitated before settling against the wall, arms wrapped around herself. I kept my hand on the wrench tucked into my belt, scanning the empty streets. We weren't safe yet, but for now we had a chance. Morning came slowly, the first rays of sunlight creeping over the rooftops. Alina stirred beside me, rubbing her eyes. We should move, I said, standing up and stretching. She nodded, but before we could mount the bike, my phone buzzed. I frowned. No one ever called me this early. I checked the screen. Unknown number. Alina noticed my hesitation. Who is it? I hesitated before answering. Hello. A deep, cold voice responded. Jackson Carter. You've made a very dangerous mistake. I stiffened. Who is this? You know who I am, the voice said. And you know what I want. My stomach turned to stone. Marcus Sinclair. Alina paled beside me. She must have heard him. You have something that belongs to me, Sinclair continued. Return her, and I'll forget this ever happened. I clenched my jaw. And if I don't? The silence stretched before he spoke again, his voice chillingly calm. Then I'll make sure you regret it. The line went dead. Alina grabbed my arm. Jackson, we have to go. Now. She was right. Because if Marcus Sinclair had my number, it meant he already knew where we were. I jumped on the bike, Alina scrambling behind me. Just as I revved the engine, tires screeched in the distance. Black SUVs flooded the entrance to the industrial district, blocking every exit. Damn it. I cursed, twisting the throttle. We sped off just as a gunshot rang out, shattering the air. Alina gasped, ducking against my back. They're shooting at us. No kidding. I swerved hard, dodging debris. I needed an opening, any opening. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw an old service tunnel ahead, barely wide enough for a bike. I gunned it. The tunnel loomed closer. Alina sucked in a breath. Jackson, we won't. We will. The moment we reached the entrance, I ducked low, squeezing through just as the SUVs skidded to a stop outside. We made it, but we weren't out of danger yet. The tunnel stretched into darkness, damp and cold. My headlights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Alina clung to my waist. Where does this lead? I swallowed. Hopefully out. We had no choice but to follow the path, the distant shouts of Sinclair's men echoing behind us. Then up ahead I saw it. An old maintenance ladder leading up. I skidded to a stop. Climb. Now. Alina scrambled up, her fingers shaking. As soon as she reached the top, she pushed open a rusty grate, revealing an alleyway above. I climbed up after her, pulling the grate shut just as heavy boots thundered through the tunnel below. We held our breath. Then, silence. Alina exhaled, eyes wide. That was too close. I nodded, gripping her shoulder. We need to disappear. For good. She stared at me. Where can we go? I looked up at the city skyline. I know a place. And with that, we vanished into the city. We didn't stop running until we reached the lower side of the city, an area where streetlights flickered unreliably and people minded their own business. It was the kind of place where questions got you in trouble, which was exactly what we needed. I led Alina down an alley, stopping in front of an old, graffiti-covered steel door. I knocked twice, then paused, then knocked 3 more times. Seconds later, a peephole slid open. A pair of sharp eyes examined us before a gruff voice spoke. Jackson, it's me, Dom. Open up. The metal door creaked as it unlocked. Standing in the dimly lit entrance was Dominic, a former street racer turned mechanic. He was older than me, his arms covered in grease and old scars. He had Alina, then me. You're bringing trouble. I exhaled. Yeah, but I need a place to lay low. Dom hesitated before stepping aside. Get in. The inside was a cluttered but secure hideout. Half workshop, half-living space. It smelled of oil and burnt rubber. Alina clung to her arms, glancing around nervously. "You look like you just crawled out of hell," Dom muttered, grabbing a beer from the fridge and tossing it to me. "Feels like it," I said, catching it. Dom leaned against the counter. "You gonna tell me why the hell Sinclair's men are sniffing around?" Alina looked at me, unsure how much to reveal. I sighed. "She's running from her father. He wants to force her into a business marriage." Dom snorted. "Rich people problems." Alina bristled, but before she could respond, I cut in. "It's worse than that. They tracked us everywhere. Even here isn't safe for long." Dom took a deep breath, rubbing his chin. "I know a guy. He specializes in making people disappear." Alina's eyes widened. "Like fake identities?" "New names, new passports, a whole new life," Dom said. "But it won't be cheap." I clenched my jaw. Money was a problem, but right now, staying alive was the priority. Alina straightened. "I'll pay." I shot her a look. "Alina, I have an offshore account," she interrupted. "My father doesn't control it." Dom raised a brow. "Then we might just have a way out." But before we could discuss further, something shattered in the alley outside. All three of us tensed. Then a low voice. "We know you're in there, Carter." Sinclair's men had found us. Again. Dom cursed under his breath. "You led them to my damn doorstep?" I pulled Alina behind me. We didn't have a choice. Heavy footsteps echoed outside. The door wouldn't hold forever. Dom moved fast, tossing me an old revolver. "You know how to use it?" I checked the chamber. "Yeah." He nodded. "Then get her out of here. I'll buy you some time." Alina grabbed my arm. "We can't leave you." Dom smirked. "Kid, I've been in worse scraps than this. Get moving." The pounding on the door intensified. I took Alina's hand, dragging her toward the back exit. Just as we slipped through, the front door burst open. Shouts and gunfire erupted behind us, but we didn't stop running. We raced through the city, weaving through dark alleys until we reached an abandoned train yard. I stopped to catch my breath, my grip on Alina's hand tightening. "We can't keep running forever," I said. She swallowed hard. "Then what do we do?" I looked at her, making a decision that would change everything. "We end this." Her breath hitched. "You mean, we go to Sinclair?" She stiffened. "Jackson, that's suicide. Not if we play it right." I exhaled, heart pounding. "We don't just run. We take the fight to him." She hesitated. Then, slowly she nodded. "If we wanted freedom, we had to take it." The Sinclair estate loomed ahead, gated, heavily guarded, a fortress of power and wealth. I parked the bike just outside, my pulse hammering. Alina took a shaky breath. "Are you sure about this?" "No," I admitted. "But it's the only way." We approached the gates. The guards recognized Alina immediately, their hands going to their weapons. Then, the doors opened, and a deep voice echoed from inside. "Let them in." Marcus Sinclair stood in the grand hall, exuding power. His cold eyes landed on Alina first. Then me. "You finally came to your senses," he said. I stepped forward. "I came to end this." Sinclair smirked. "And how exactly do you plan to do that?" I clenched my fists. "You let her go. No more chasing. No more threats." He chuckled darkly. "And if I refuse?" Alina, standing tall beside me, answered before I could. "Then I'll destroy everything you built." Sinclair's amusement faded. "Excuse me. You think I'm just some puppet," she said, her voice sharp. "But I know where all the skeletons are buried. The corruption, the deals, the people you bribed. I have proof. And if you don't let me go, I'll make sure the world sees it." A beat of silence. Then, Sinclair's jaw clenched. "You wouldn't." Alina met his gaze without flinching. "Try me." For the first time, Sinclair looked unsure. Then, slowly he exhaled. "Fine." He turned to his men. "Stand down." I didn't breathe until the guards lowered their weapons. "It's over," I murmured. Alina reached for my hand, squeezing it. "It is now." We left the Sinclair estate that night free. Dom survived the shootout. He called me later, laughing. "You crazy bastard. You actually did it." Alina transferred her money, securing our escape. And me? I got on my bike, Alina holding on to me, and we rode into the unknown. Not running, not hiding, just living. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough.